Hi everybody, brilliant to be here. I'm Jenna Tiffany. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to be talking about the 7 common mistakes in marketing strategy and providing tips on how you can make sure that you overcome them and avoid them. These are taken from my new book, Marketing Strategy, Overcome Common Pitfalls and Create Effective Marketing. It's released on the 3rd of May and it's available to all of you at 20% discount. If you go to my website, letstalkstrategy.co.uk/Digital Marketing Europe 2021, you'll find the discount available there and the form to complete, and the book will be sent to you as soon as it's published. Okay, so let's get started. A little bit about my company. So my company is called Let's Talk Strategy. We provide straightforward marketing strategy to businesses all over the world. Some example of companies that we work with on the screen, but we also work with small startup organisations as well. I'm a chartered marketeer, fellow of the EAIDAL, and have been nominated as one of the top 50 marketeers in the world. So I'm very excited to be here with you today. Okay, pitfall number 1, strategy. The strategy-free strategy. A lot of marketers mistake tactics for strategy. This is part of the passion behind me actually writing a book, was to provide a really simple framework so you could see the different steps that are required when going through a strategy. But also the strategy part sometimes gives people a lot of fear. They think it's this really long, arduous process, it's going to be really boring, and I just want to get to the fun bits of defining the tactics, thinking about the copy and the imagery and where you're going to be displaying your marketing. But strategy doesn't have to be like that at all. And I'm going to show you how you can overcome the strategy-free strategy. Also, the challenge with this is that many marketers for some time have been tasked with promoting constant sales messaging and discounts and offers, and you may find yourself in that current situation. And these discounts and offers are tactics, they are not strategies. But a lot of marketing over the past few decades has focused solely on these kinds of tactics. And the result has been really a generation of marketers who've learnt to view tactics as strategy. And that's where that misalignment comes from and the misunderstanding in the industry. So I think it's probably worth starting with what is a strategy. So to break it down really in a straightforward way, strategy is who, what, where, when, and why. Think of it as the map which takes you to your destination. Tactics is the how. It is the vehicles you use to get there. So strategy and tactics work together, they work hand in hand, and neither can be as effective on their own, they have to work together. But unfortunately, many marketing campaigns tend to go towards the noise before defeat, which is a phrase you may have heard from a really famous book, The Art of War. But throwing tactics around without much strategy really can damage your organisation. We've seen lots of companies where this has really been a big problem, like General Motors, for example. They famously went out of business in 2009 for their reluctance to keep up with changing times. And for decades, their strategy was little more than a fixed deck of tactics. So really important that you define that strategic piece and then think about how you're going to be able to implement the strategy. So I've broken this down and this is taken directly from my new book. It's a framework. I've created this to really help marketers, to help business owners, to help students studying marketing, to understand what needs to be included in a marketing strategy, because I didn't feel there was really a framework or an easy way to go through this without it seeming like a really arduous process. So it starts with the really breaking down the word strategy. So this makes it easier to remember. Starts with this scenario, thinking about that wider context that your organisation is operating in, both internally and outside the organisation itself as well. Your targets, so what are your objectives? And I have a new method and way to make sure that you can overcome another common pitfall, which I'm going to come to in a second, of being able to create those effective objectives. You then have the reach, so who is your audience? We spend a lot of time of thinking about the different channels we're going to use, the different copy we're going to use, but do we really spend that much time thinking about who our customers are? The awareness, so driving the awareness in the places of where your customer will be. The tactics, so you can see we've gone through 4 stages already, and then we get to tactics. Whereas most of the time, those 4 stages are forgotten and we jump straight to the tactics. And we can see how much information we're then missing that should be feeding into our marketing. Execute, so how are you going to execute those tactics and the strategy? Do you have enough resources, for example, and budget? What results are you hoping to generate? And how are you going to measure those results and report those back and use them as key learnings? There are 3 frameworks to use to overcome that first common pitfall of a strategy-free strategy, and that is the SWOT and PESTLE. There's been a lot of discussion about SWOT and PESTLE in the past couple of weeks. Mark Ritson clearly is not a fan. I'd actually adapted the SWOT so that it did start to give you more information inside the marketing department of what you could be doing more of, less of, what you might have some limitations of as well. And I call that the SWOT-L. What is the SWOT-L telling you? This is to include the existing, so really thinking about assessing and analysing. What does your existing marketing activity consist of? What channels is the organisation actively using? Are they achieving the KPIs that have been set? Do they engage the target audience, for example? And what's working and what isn't, in your opinion? Limitations. What is holding your marketing back? What's the structure of the marketing team? Maybe that's holding you back. Are there skill gaps, or is there an experienced team? Is there an adequate marketing budget, for example? And all of this needs to be considered within your competitive landscape as well. And then finally, leverage. What's already successful that can be leveraged? Are there agencies in place, for example, that are really effective and really skilled and really know your business? Is there an experienced and capable team? Which of your tactics are currently working and why? And you see how that SWOT then evolves into actually telling you, giving you more actionable tips and focus areas of what you could improve within your marketing. So once you've defined your strategy, there is another pitfall to avoid within the strategy-free strategy, and that is communication. And this is a quote taken from James Delves from the CIM. Clearly articulating and effectively communicating the strategy across the key stakeholders in the organisation to receive support and buy-in, as well as making sure that everybody's working towards the same goals and people see the marketing strategy aligns with what they are doing. Marketing strategy, yes, okay, is created by the marketing department, but it should feed into the wider business. And that's really important because everybody needs to be involved within the implementation of that strategy. So communication really is key. This is the same when you're communicating with your customers. And we've probably all seen this, I'm sure. Burger King sent this tweet, "Women belong in the kitchen." It was part of a thread. If you went through the rest of the thread, it actually had a really good meaning behind what they were trying to communicate, albeit quite poorly, in that they conducted some research and identified that there was a lack of women chefs in the industry. But this lack of communication, this lack of awareness of their customer, this lack of awareness of the wider context starts to show that they haven't conducted that situation analysis. Okay, pitfall number 2, objectives. They start off being really vague. Avoid being vague in your objectives. Be as specific as possible in your objective. If there's a target to increase the visitors to your website, for example, you could have an objective that is to increase website visits from new visitors by 5%. Always include at least one KPI so that then you can use something to measure against. If a KPI is not included, it's impossible to clearly measure the success or failure of the objective as to whether you've achieved it or not. So if we think about that example of growing the website visits, it could be that you want to increase that by 5%. If 1,000 people currently visit your website within 12 months, then 5% increase is in 12 months. equals 1,050. So think about what that clear KPI is going to be to us to effectively measure success of your objectives. And be realistic. Really think about whether it's achievable for the organisation, but also achievable within the wider context of what's happening. So we think there's been a lot of change at the moment with lots of things going on due to COVID. Be realistic in realigning expectations and setting those objectives based on the market landscape as well. When thinking about setting your objective, okay, so setting those targets can be broken down into what I've created is the scale framework. I felt that SMART was really useful, but there sometimes was a difficulty in creating a good distinction between actionable and realistic. So I've broken this down further. So let's go through this. This is how you will overcome creating those vague objectives and that common pitfall number 2 of creating those objectives in the first place. So starting with the S, being strategic. So why are these objectives being set in the first place? What are you trying to achieve? What's that desired ambition? Next part is to be considered. So what are those business objectives and the goals that your marketing will be contributing to? You might find, as I've come across this quite a few times in organisations, where there might not be a really clear business objective and you might have a little hurdle there to overcome. But it's good to be able to align your marketing to the business objectives. And then when you have that conversation of what is marketing contributing to, it makes it much easier to be able to answer that question. Audience, who are you hoping to engage? Be really specific here. If you're thinking about driving more traffic to the website and that's part of your objectives, think about what type of traffic, what source are they coming from? Are they new or existing visitors? Do you want them from a particular location, maybe a particular country? Lift. What are your overall numerical performance target? What is it? What are you hoping to achieve? What is that key measure that you're going to use to be able to define success? And lastly, end. So what is the end date for achieving the objective? Think about being really specific here and including the month and the year. Try and avoid being vague, such as in a couple of weeks or in a month or in a year. Try and be really specific so then you can create milestones in your marketing planning to actually achieving those objectives. Here's some example of good objectives. I've taken these as email marketing objectives here. And you'll see how they are really quite detailed. The top one there, increase the customer lifetime value from our email subscribers from £1 per email address to £2 per email addresses within 12 months. Okay, could have had a month and a year on the end, but you see how there's a clear goal in mind there of what they're hoping to achieve. This then enables you to be able to identify what the first action needs to be to achieve those objectives, where there might be some potential issues in place that you might have to overcome as well to achieve them. Bad objectives. Let's see how vague this objective is. Increase revenue from email. If we look at that in comparison to that previous objective, this doesn't really tell you much. It doesn't tell you what the wider context is, how much you want to increase it by. There's no time frame, and that KPI is completely missing as well. This could have been rephrased to increase email revenue from 20% to 25% in 12 months from our highly engaged subscribers, as an example. Okay, moving on into pitfall number 3, not knowing your customer. I think the greatest example of this in recent times is the Super League. Wow. It literally lasted 3, maybe 4 days before all the clubs started to pull out because of the backlash that they received from fans. Other clubs, even managers of the clubs themselves, football players who also did not support the new Super League. What does this tell us? This tells us that they didn't know their fans, they did not know their customers, they did not know their audience. So the chairmen of these clubs all came together, they thought it was a brilliant idea. They didn't think about the wider context, they didn't conduct that situation analysis, they did not know their customer. Such a great example of the dangers of not knowing your customer and the damage that that's now caused. And here we have the global category manager at Tommy Tippy, the global brand, talking about here the importance and role of marketing and marketing strategy to understand customers' needs, their wants and desires, so that they can deliver innovation as an organisation that delivers against those and makes parents' lives easier, because they've identified that is really crucial for their target audience. There are lots of tools that you can use to find out more about your customer. There's examples here on the screen. And each one of these enables you to be able to research not only what's being said about your organisation by the target audience, but also understanding what content your audience is also interested in as well. This can all then feed into understanding who your customers are. If we think about positioning of your organisation to align with who your customers are and what they're interested in, Spotify has really clearly nailed their positioning. Really simple what they do. They provide music streaming. They haven't deviated away from that. They haven't diluted that offering whatsoever. And everybody knows Spotify for what they do. You can listen to music. Simple, really simple and straightforward. And that is what their audience wants from them. That's what their expectation is as well, because of that clear alignment of positioning. A way to be able to document what you identify as your likes and the dislikes of your customers is to use a customer persona. An example here of a persona for Action for Children, a charity, and they identified what their donators really liked. And this is an example here on the screen. This then enabled them to tailor their marketing, tailor their communications, align them to the likes of their donators and audience to engage them further. And this is where it's really important to be able to identify who your customers are and being able to market them effectively. Also think about this in terms of the product life cycle. If we think about Lucozade and where it's come from to where it is now, being advertised as a glucose drink that children need when they're sick, going through to being an athletic drink to now a really healthy alternative to having, instead of having water, having flavoured drinks as well. And they've gone all the way through this evolution of their product life cycle to fit with changes of customers' wants and needs. And that's how they've kept up with those different changes as well. There's a brilliant tool to use called the augmented product if you haven't used this model before. It's really great to be able to pull out what your offering is rather than just thinking about it as a single service or a single product. So it starts with that core benefit. What does your product or service actually give? What's that core benefit? What's that single thing that really your customers benefit from? Then thinking about the actual product, so the brand name, the design, the packaging, and then moving that on into the augmented product. So what does the aftercare sales service look like? What does the warranty look like? Are there some elements in there that maybe you need to tweak and adjust now you've identified more about your target audience? This is a really good way of bringing out those different layers of your product and then using that to inform your marketing activity. Okay, pitfall number 4, and I've briefly touched on this one already, where tactics are defined before the strategy. So during my time in marketing, I've repeatedly faced this challenge and pitfall, and when I've worked in the marketing team for brands, I wouldn't be briefed on the broader strategic picture, but only the tactical activity. And there is value in understanding the overarching objectives, the ambitions of the business, and based on that information, there might have been different recommendations I would have made. And I've also experienced this as a consultant in my own agency. I often receive a brief that doesn't match and doesn't contain much detail at all in the way of objectives and strategic planning, but it contains lots in the way of the different types of how marketing tactics should and shouldn't be used. So really think about all those stages, the 4 stages, before you even get to the strategy part. Because the next part you want to be thinking about is how are you going to actually execute the strategy, what's needed, and what resources, skills and tools do you need to be able to do that. And when you're thinking about this, it's a really useful model to use is the EAIDAL model. And I've added the educate and loyalty, the educate to the top and the loyalty to the bottom. And this is all about driving the awareness, interest, desire, action and loyalty towards your brand and customer. So let's say, for example, a customer has a problem. Their car is broken down and they need a new one. They search the internet and they come across a brand, they sign up to receive their emails. They compare various companies and then they make their decision. And they've just followed a really basic customer journey. And in this example, there will be timely communication that will be sent, whether it's email, push notifications, direct mail, advertisements. And each one of those will be trying to inform them along the decision-making process. So what's really important here is that you are thinking about your tactics alongside the customer journey and where they are. Because it should be tailored towards where that customer is, because the information that they need, what they're going to be interested in, what's going to benefit them is going to be completely different. So do always have this in the back of your mind when you're thinking about the tactics in your customer, once you've defined your strategy and objectives. Pitfall number 5, and I also see this a lot across marketing, inconsistency. So the key area to focus on when you're rolling out your strategy is consistency, because consistency really is crucial to ensuring that your message is clearly understood. For example, if you have a tone of voice and it's inconsistent, things will quickly become really confusing for your audience. And when things are confusing, it's a block to understanding. If a customer doesn't understand your brand or its message, they're more unlikely to buy. It's like kind of a really good example of this is Marks and Spencer's in the UK, a clothing brand. Who is it really for? What is their USP? They've recently just announced they're going to start housing other fashion brands within M&S themselves. But no one really knows. It's very confusing and the end result is a really poor performance for the organisation. You want your prospects and potential new customers to be completely clear about the products and services that you provide. If things aren't 100% clear, whether that's in tone of voice, visual representation of your branding, or it's difficult to understand where it's not very clearly communicated what you do, you will not engage your audience. One key area to overcoming this, and if there's one thing that you take away today, please go and action this straight away, is brand guidelines. Now you might think, oh yeah, that's just a document that I have saved on a Google Drive or saved on a folder. We don't really look at it that often. If your brand guidelines are not clear, give too much scope for somebody to make their own interpretation, you will start to develop inconsistency. I recently worked with an organisation helping with their marketing structure and strategy, and they had brand guidelines that were 20 pages. They had the full rainbow spectrum of colours that they could use. They had lots of different fonts, but worst of all is that they had lots of different versions of the brand guidelines that had been updated by different people, and they didn't have one core document that they went to. Your brand guidelines should be on 1-2 pages maximum. They shouldn't be endless pages with lots of different colour spectrums in them. They should be really, really clear, really, really tight, and not give too much individual interpretation to keep that consistency. There's an example here of what my company uses. This is it. This is the brand guidelines. We send this to external organisations as well. We use it internally. Really simple and easy to understand. Leaves little room for personal interpretation. So if there's one thing you go away and change today and you review, please go and review your brand guidelines. Pitfall number 6, trying to measure everything. There is so much data available. There's so many different metrics you could be using, but you can't measure everything. And you shouldn't want to, because it should align to your marketing objectives that you've now created using the scale framework. They should be really specific. So if you have that clear KPI, it should be really clear and obvious for you for which areas you need to be measuring on and focusing your effort and time. There's a couple of ways that where you can really break this down and be really specific in terms of what you're measuring. My top tips for this is to define your benchmark. These become your check-in points to see how well you're doing. You could use this on a weekly or monthly basis to check in, monitor progress. Set your non-subjective KPIs to measure performance. These should be quantifiable, such as conversion rates, your engagement score, the click-through rate, top traffic sources, new versus returning visitors, for example. Consistency here is also crucial. So the approach taken to measure your performance should be consistent across time to enable those fair comparisons. If changes have been made to the measurement method, make sure you document the difference. Otherwise, you won't really be comparing like for like. And it should align to your objectives. There are hundreds, if not absolutely thousands, of data points that you can measure. But if they are misaligned to your objectives, they are not going to highlight anything that's relevant to your organisation or your marketing. This will ensure you're spending time and effort on the right areas that are going to provide the most valuable insights to your organisation. Okay, pitfall number 7. Undefined KPIs. Not defining those KPIs either because your objectives were too vague or because you're just not really sure, or you want to try and measure everything, you don't want to pin yourself down on a couple of KPIs. There's some key ones to really be considering and thinking about, depending on what your objectives are. The first one is the customer lifetime value. So this measures the value that the customer brings for the duration of them being a customer. And the calculation is based on the average purchase value, the average frequency of their purchases from your brand, and their average customer value as well. The average lifetime during which a customer purchases from the brand could be 5 years, for example. Their lifetime value is then calculated based on the average predicted purchase, frequency, and amount of their purchases across those 5 years. And then you can predict what that based on averaging data. So it's a really useful measure to have in place to identify what is the value of a single customer, because that then helps you align your budgets, your expectations, and there might be certain channels that are particularly good at driving a higher lifetime value of your customers. The next one is CPA, cost per acquisition. So this determines how much it costs the company to actually acquire a new customer. It measures both the marketing costs, which may be for example, your social media marketing costs and the sales costs. And then you look at the number of conversions. Really useful to have when you're analysing and splitting potential budgets across the marketing department. There's then the close rate, so measuring the number of prospects that become customers in comparison to the number of leads in the pipeline. Really, really effective KPI to have in place and measure for business-to-business organisations. And then there is the customer retention rate. So this KPI measures the percentage of customers that are retained for a specific time period. So for example, it could be that a year-on-year measurement could be made with the timing set at 12 months. So you have the number of customers at the end of the year, take away the number of customers during the year, times it by 100, and then you have the number of customers at the start of the year. This is important to understand because if this KPI is really low, it would highlight an issue in retaining customers and could demonstrate a really high churn rate. And this could effectively mean that maybe you're misaligned in the customers that you're driving to your organisation and your offering, and maybe you're not quite aligned with the right target audience. So in summary, if we break down strategy and go through that framework, and we've broken that down into the keywords here. So we have scenario, where is the business now? What situation is it in? What could impact the organisation and what's changing externally? And by going through each of these stages, you will overcome those 7 common pitfalls that I've gone through today. Your targets, so what is the desired ambition? What are your objectives? Your reach, what's the appropriate route to take to attract and engage the customer? Planning on how to drive awareness to your target audience because now you know who they are. Your tactics, what are you going to use and how are they going to be used? Always having the customer in the center of all of that as well. Execution, so how will the strategy be executed? What resources, skills and tools do you need? Generate, so how are you going to track marketing performance, measure results and response? And yield, what KPIs will you use? What learnings will you take to improve or inform the next marketing campaign? Because we should always be evolving, we should always want to improve, always want to use our learnings to inform the next campaigns. If we're chasing after tactics and we're not very strategic in our planning, it'll be really difficult to use that knowledge and use it to inform future campaigns. I've talked about 7 common pitfalls and mistakes today, often seen in marketing strategy, but there are actually 3 more. So I have 10 common pitfalls that have been created and added to my book. I've had lots of people comment and add in and interviews with the likes of Mark Ritson, for example. Dave Chaffee has contributed to my book, and lots of other marketing experts and business owners on what those 10 common pitfalls are and how to overcome them. And this is available in my new book that releases on the 3rd of May. And that's it from me today. Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you found that useful. Please feel free to visit our website, letstalkstrategy.co.uk. And if you would like to check out the book, it's available to you at 20% discount. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much.